You're listening to episode 23 of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. Here's a clip from today's conversation.
To me, success looked like higher positions, higher pay, and I just kept on that track. And I actually got to the point where I was part of a college level program in physical therapy, and I was teaching and making the most money that I ever made in my career. And that was when everything came crashing down.
Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and that you are fully loved by Him. You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer. My co-host is Holly Kane, and together we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hi friend, I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. I'm chatting with Abbey Jo Bailey in this episode all about her leadership journey. In our conversation, Abbey shares how growing closer to God has affected her leadership and how she's been able to embrace her identity in Christ. She also shares how she manages her roles as a mom and a church staff member, and we dive into the power of storytelling and the importance of using story in your leadership. I absolutely loved this conversation with Abbey because she is so real and open with us about her journey and some of her struggles. Abbey's a member of our Purposeful Leadership Facebook group, and it was so fun to get to chat with her and hear more of her story. So let me tell you a little bit about Abbey. She currently has a role as communications director at her church, and she collaborates with ministry leaders to tell the story of their church and to encourage the church to care about the stories of people who might be disconnected from church or God, or maybe they don't even have a relationship with God yet. She is a self-described social media scroller, aspiring yogi, or runner depending on the day. She's fueled by coffee and Jesus, and she's repeatedly saved by grace. Outside work, Abbey loves spending time with her family, including her 4-year-old dinosaur trainer son, her 9-month-old blue-eyed beauty, and her 30-something fitness-focused husband. Today's show is brought to you by Audible. I am really excited to share with you that Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. And let me tell you that I have actually been using Audible for the past year, and I absolutely love it as my primary way to read books. So I'm able to pop in my earbuds and listen to some of the books that I want to read and do it just like I do with podcasts. I can listen while I'm driving, while I'm out for a walk, while I'm doing the dishes. So I want to let you know that you can get your free audiobook and your trial membership by going to estherlittlefield.com/audible. You can browse the unmatched selection of audio programs and download your free trial and start listening. It's that easy. So again, just go to estherlittlefield.com/audible to take advantage of the free trial. So let's go ahead and jump in to our conversation with Abbey Jo Bailey. Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, and today I'm here with my co-host, Holly Kane, and our guest, Abbey Jo Bailey. Welcome to the show, Abbey.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome, Abbey.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We're so excited to get started and learn more about you and your leadership journey. So can you start off just by telling us a little bit about yourself and about your leadership journey?
Sure, I'd love to. So my name is Abbey, and I am a born and raised Buckeye, living in Ohio, and then moved out to California for work. That was part of my leadership journey I'll get to. And then I'm now in the desert in Arizona, thanks to my husband. So about 6 months out of the year, I love that. And the other 6 months, I just put one foot in front of the other and get through the 110 degrees.
Wow. Yeah.
Every day. So I am, a wife to Tyler and a mother to two, a 4-year-old son and a 9-month-old little baby. So it's a fun and busy time of life right now, and just loving it. So that's kind of a little bit of my personal background. And then professionally, I knew when I was, a freshman in high school, that I wanted to go into physical therapy of all things. My mom was actually a secretary at a physical therapy office. So that was my first, I just knew that's what I wanted to do. And I just set my sights on that and went to college for that. And about a year in is when I really realized, you know what, there's some cool opportunities leadership wise in this field. And I just started kind of going after that and just seeing what rehab management looked like. And at that time, leadership to me was the same thing as authority, or the same thing as, knowing the most. So you can imagine how those early years went, with that being my idea of leadership. But
everybody loves a know-it-all.
Right? Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. So I definitely didn't set myself up well there in the early years, but got a lot of really great experience for sure. And actually got an awesome opportunity to move out to California to oversee a large rehab department out there. So I ended up spending a year out there in California. I actually met my husband during that time, and he drew me to Arizona. So that's what brought me over here. And I did rehab management for a little bit longer. And then it was kind of like the floor dropped out underneath me, or at least that's how my experience of this was. But basically my husband had gone on in his master's degree program and had just finished his master's, and God was saying it's time to let him take the lead, so to speak, in our family and in his career. And that meant us moving to where we live currently, outside of Tucson, Arizona. So I had built up this career literally over 10 years, and it just felt like it was being just the plug was being pulled out of it. So that was a really hard time for me personally, but looking back now, I know God was working in my life, and he was wanting me to see things and come to know my identity in him instead of my identity in my job and that kind of thing. So that's led us to where we are today, and to my role now, which I never expected, but working in communications at a local church here in Tucson and overseeing the communications department here. So it's been an awesome journey, and just so thankful for the path that God has led us on.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
I love that too. So you mentioned that you started in physical therapy and then started working towards the management side of that and leadership. But when did you personally realize that you were a leader, that you could be doing those sorts of things?
Yeah, well, to be totally honest, I was the bossy sister. I know I've heard lots of other people share that on this podcast, but I feel like that's where my humble beginnings, or maybe not so humble, started, was as that bossy big sister. But I would say even in my preteen years, I was helping lead young girls' dance classes, and kind of getting interested in leading others and trying to help others and trying to figure out what that looked like. So yeah, I would say from a pretty early age.
So how would you say your faith has impacted your leadership journey?
Majorly. Anytime that, I've gone through something personally or relationally, I would say that's basically been what's pointed me back to God. I grew up knowing of God, and my grandparents went to church, so I occasionally went to Sunday school with them, but I didn't grow up knowing what it meant to be a Christian. So it really wasn't until my early 20s that, when I was actually living in California, my aunt worked at a church there and started inviting me, and I just started seeing how real it was, and you didn't have to put on this front, and you didn't have to show up for God as there weren't any expectations, you just came and you were just there and you just experienced him. And so that was like the beginning of my relationship with God, like truly on a personal level. And ever since then, I just can't imagine having walked through the things that I've walked through personally and professionally without him. And that's part of where my passion is today for communications and what I'm doing in the local church, and trying to reach people who may not yet know God or may not know what it's like to have a relationship with him.
Mm. Sounds like a total perspective switch for you as far as leadership, when that faith sort of injected itself in your life.
Definitely. And I would say it was kind of a slow process. In the early years, I think I was just kind of getting to know God and getting to know like Christian life and just what does that all mean. And for a while, my leadership style kind of stayed the same, that authoritative, and a lot of pressure on myself to feel like I needed to know all the answers and, all of that. And then it was truly when I started working at the church I'm at now, about 3.5, 4 years ago, that I started experiencing leadership in a different way. And it just opened my eyes to a whole new world with leadership. And since then, it's just been so much fun and so hard and so exhausting and so much fun. So, yeah.
I can relate to that description.
Have to include it all. It's all of those. Yeah.
Can you tell us more about how it's been different? You mentioned in like the past 3 or 4 years that you've experienced leadership in a different way. In what way has it been different for you?
The biggest switch has been from feeling that it's something that I have to be above everyone to be able to lead, to knowing that God created me with a unique voice and a unique perspective, and just leading, speaking out of that confidently, and then letting God be part of that process of the actual leading of people, and me just bringing my voice, bringing how he created me, how he wired me, and letting that come out authentically.
I love that.
That's amazing. And my next question I literally have on my paper is about leading with confidence and embracing how God has wired you. So you led us right into that.
Yeah.
So tell us more about how you mentioned earlier about embracing your identity and your identity not being in your job or your role. So what are some of the ways that you've learned to embrace your identity?
Yeah, I would say I'm still on that path, but it's definitely come a long way. You know, I would say, as time has gone on, having people in my life who are reminding me and encouraging me about my identity in Christ, and getting to know Christ personally, I would say, has also made a big difference in that. So I would say for the longest time, I was just trying to climb the corporate ladder. And to me, success looked like higher positions, higher pay. And I just kept on that track. And I actually got to the point where I was part of a college level program in physical therapy, and I was teaching and making the most money that I ever made in my career. And that was when everything came crashing down. And I felt like that was kind of a wake-up call from God, just to say, yes, you have purpose, and yes, you can do great things, but it's not about the image of it. It's not about the position, the title, the money. So it really, for me, part of that process was kind of getting knocked off the ladder, so to speak, and really fully feeling that and struggling through realizing that I had put my identity in what I was doing instead of who I am. So the past several years have really been practice in just learning who I am and being confident in that. And truly, actually, one of the biggest things too has been knowing what I want, or knowing what matters to me. For the longest time, I was more of a helper, in that I kind of let the room or the people in the room sway what I did or sway my involvement. And I've learned a lot more to bring what matters to me into that, and to not just wait for something to fall in my lap. So that's been a lot of my journey with the identity.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So how have you embraced how God has wired you? And I think, maybe if there's any tools or any resources that you have used to help you figure out what you want, like you just shared, figuring out what you want, or figuring out how God has wired you uniquely. Can you share that?
Yeah. So when I first started working at the church, we were using Myers-Briggs a lot. So that was a really interesting path to go on. And I think there have definitely been things that I've learned about myself. I never fully resonated with whether I'm an INFJ or an INTJ. That's always been kind of like on the fence for me. And it just seemed very, I don't know what the word would be, but just final, like, this is what you are. So over time, we kind of started using that a little less, because we were actually ended up using it in a way that we would try to get in front of, well, this person's this type, so this is what they need, versus just interacting with them on a kind of personal level and finding out, each individual is still very different. So most recently, I would say it's been the Enneagram, and I feel like I'm just diving into that, and it takes a lot of, I think, internal work. But I'm an Enneagram 3. That's what I most resonate with, and just started digging into the instinct. Have you guys heard about the different instincts related to your Enneagram, what, like self-preservation and?
Yes,
Yes,
I have.
So I just started digging into that, and so I'm trying to figure out, I think I'm most related to the self-preservation 3, which is a different kind of 3. It's really weird, because what I've been reading so far is about you're vain about being vain. I was like, oh wow, I'm gonna have to chew on that one.
Yes.
I don't know about that piece of the Enneagram. I'm going to have to dig into that part.
Yeah, I was going to say, oh, sorry.
No, go
I was
ahead.
just going to mention, for anyone who hasn't listened, episode 17 is all about the Enneagram, but Beth did not get into the whole instincts and all of that. So there's so much you can learn within the Enneagram, and you can just keep going deeper in terms of how you can understand how God has wired you. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So far, it's pretty much felt like a version of personal counseling.
Yep.
So I'm really enjoying that. I feel like it's really leading me in a way that I can stay focused on how God made me, but I can see the like shadow or the difficult sides of how I'm wired, and also see like the beautiful and awesome things, awesome ways that God has created me. So so I'm loving that right now, and just gonna keep digging into that for a while.
Okay, awesome. So I always love to find out, one of the things we focus on here with the podcast is encouraging women to embrace their gifts. So I would love to hear if you can share with us what one or two of your gifts are, Abby.
One or two of my gifts. I would say the first thing that comes to mind is that I've been told before that I'm a good listener. I really value being a listener. Like, I'm definitely more of an internal processor. So I feel that I can kind of sit and take in and just let people talk, and just ask little questions along the way. And I really enjoy that. And I definitely feel like that's a gift that God has given me.
Yeah, it's a great gift for leadership.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we think we have to just be the ones that talk a lot. And I think we talked about that in one episode, Holly. I feel like we talked about that at some point, that actually leadership involves a lot more listening than talking.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about being the loudest voice in the room.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things I feel like God has been teaching me to rest in, that, since I don't have to know every answer, I don't have to be the loudest voice, I can listen, and I can lead people by listening and hearing where they are and what matters to them, and then getting on the same page and moving things forward. So yeah, that's definitely been an awesome gift.
Okay, so Abby, how would you define leading with confidence?
Leadership to me is using your unique voice, taking risks with that unique voice so that you can support others and lead others toward what the ultimate or the goal that you're leading toward. So that's what I would say. Leadership is a combination of using your voice, but also listening and taking risks with that.
Yeah, love
so
that.
Good. So you shared with us that you recently had a big leadership undertaking in your ministry role at church. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure, yeah, I'd love to. So this past year, we decided that we wanted to be more intentional about the story that we're telling. And that being, of course, the story of God, but even more specifically, we wanted to focus in on what's the story that our church is telling. I believe that there's power in storytelling. You see it in the Bible a lot. You see it in people's lives. You see it in movies. There's so much power in being able to share life experiences and feelings and all of those things, and using them in ways that can hopefully lead people toward Christ is really what we're focused on. So this past year, we decided that we're going to do a ministry year theme, and it's called Your Story Matters. And I kind of headed that up as far as creating what that story framework was going to look like for the year, and then trying to lead the staff in carrying that out into the church through this year. So it's been a big undertaking, but really fun, and I'm learning a lot.
So as I think about what you did previous and what you're doing now, how do you feel that you were able to transition from physical therapy management to communications at a church? They sound so different, but perhaps they might be more related than we think.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've wondered the same thing myself because I don't think there is any kind of direct translation or connection that that's come to the surface for me anyways. What I do know is that I've always really valued communication from a clarity standpoint and from a meaning standpoint, that anytime I've communicated, whether it's been through writing, that was like a creative outlet for me as a child, and then even in therapy, I guess, the type of documentation that we did, the meaning side of that has always been, really important to me personally. So I think that is part of what drew me to where I am now, and where it's really blossomed into this storytelling side, because there's so much meaning in stories. So it's just you can't get enough.
I think that transition kind of underscores even more what you were saying about how you needed to find your identity in who you were rather than your role. Because if you look at those two roles, they are quite different, but who you are hasn't changed, and who God is making you into may not be any different, had you continued in physical therapy or now that you're in church communication. So I just love that idea, because a lot of times we get so connected to role and the end goal that we envision, when in fact there might be a totally different end goal that God has planned for us. And just goes to show us that we need to hold loosely to those specific roles that he gives us, and hold more tightly to him and our relationship and identity with him. So I love that.
So true. That gave me chills just even hearing you say that. It's just so true. I just, more and more now, I feel that there truly are seasons to life, and you're kind of, I don't want to say you're on the ride, so to speak, because it's not like you don't have any control in it. But like you said, holding loosely and being present and being where you are in that season of life, and knowing that most likely that's going to change, but you've got God, and God has only good things. So
Right.
I think it's exciting. It's exciting to see how you kind of change and morph and grow. Love it.
Absolutely. So, Abby, you shared how you are really, it sounds like you're passionate about storytelling and about how that can really, stories can influence people, right, in such a powerful way. So, can you share with our listeners just anything that maybe any tips for storytelling, specifically for leaders? I think all of us as leaders could use storytelling in our leadership. So are there any examples that you have of how you've done that, or any tips that you would want to share on how we can incorporate storytelling more effectively in our leadership?
Sure. A couple things that I would say is similar to with leadership, kind of knowing the end goal, or knowing what you're leading people toward. It's a similar idea with the story, kind of knowing you're wanting to take them from point A to point B, and there's going to be a journey along the way. So thinking about that, being intentional about that, is part of storytelling. And you can't necessarily predict everything that's going to happen along the way, but you can be intentional about what you'd like people to experience along the way, and encourage that, or do the things that are going to help create that path, create that journey, and then just kind of work with God and see how things morph and change along the way. So I'd say that's one thing. And then one of the biggest realizations for me with storytelling came from a book by Donald Miller called Story Brand. Such an awesome book. I really recommend it if you're into storytelling. But it's about the hero of your story, and the importance of the hero is never you. The hero of your story is always the person or the group outside of you, and you generally take more of the guide role. So for what we're doing this year, the church is the hero of our story, and we as like the staff are really just the guide, kind of guiding them toward this Your Story Matters theme, where we're basically trying to reach people who may not yet know God and tell them that their story matters, that we care about their story, that God cares about their story, right where it is, good, bad, everything, all of their story. So yeah, that's definitely been a couple of the big things in storytelling that have been really interesting and fun.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. I've read Story Brand as well. We'll put the link to that book in the show notes for people, because it's an excellent book. It's really a marketing and communications book, but I think that everybody involved in church ministry should read it because it's so relevant to that as well, like you shared. So
yeah, I love it. It was a great resource. And he has another book that I am struggling to think of the name of right now, but it's basically about his story. He wrote it before.
Blue Like Jazz.
Yeah.
Blue Like Jazz is one, and then there's another one.
There's one about a road trip, I feel like.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to...
Sorry, Donald. If you're listening to this podcast.
So sorry. It's a million miles in 1,000 years.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. So that's like his story, and how like things have happened in his story. And I listened to that first, and then got Story Brand right after that, because it was just like, wow, the power of story in people's lives is just amazing. So yeah.
So I want to go back really quick to something that you said when you were answering that. I loved that you said that you can't always control what happens in a story, but you can be intentional about the experience you want people to have. And I loved that. I thought that was so perfect, because as leaders, we have no control over how this all happens, how this all shakes out. We can be intentional about the experience that our team has, or the experience that our clients or customers have, or our church members. And I just love that so much, because it sort of takes the responsibility off of us to control the outcome, and in fact really puts the perspective on our relationship with God and how we work that out, and how we are just intentional about putting things out rather than controlling or puppet mastering the ending. That's not what leadership is. God is ultimately in control and he's sovereign. So I just love that you said that. So
Oh, well, thank you. No, it's been a huge shift for me. Like, that's another one of those things I would say that's really shifted in since I become a Christian and leading since then, is that people over process has become huge. In the past, it was in therapy for sure. It was process, requirements, all of that stuff had to come first, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because really what you're doing is helping people.
Yeah.
But, but everything else like dictated kind of how you worked with people, versus now it's people over process, and the relationship with God and the relationship with those people being primary. And then what happens out of that is really, that's God, God working in that. So,
Yeah.
And I think that requires surrender, which
Yeah.
is something that we're not always good at.
No,
Or maybe I'm just speaking
hard.
for myself, but surrendering over the control of what happens, because even just if you think about leading as a mom, right? Or leading in your family, like one of my biggest struggles as a mom has been giving up control over how my daughter turns out. Because I could, like you said, I can be intentional about what she experiences and how I design our life as a family, right? And how my husband and I create opportunities for her. But in the end, I don't really get to control what she does with her life.
Yeah.
And just like the people that we're leading. So I think that's a good thing to remember, that this leadership journey is a lot about surrendering the outcome to God, as you pointed out.
Definitely.
I love that. So one of the challenges of being multi-passionate is that it means we're often juggling all kinds of different things. So you're a mom and you work full-time at your church. Can you tell us a little bit how you manage those different roles?
Well, I work part-time currently. It feels like I work full-time.
Sorry, my bad. I put full-time.
No, that's okay. So I work part-time at the church, and then the rest of the time with the kids. I'm usually at the church like 4 days a week or so, and then I have the other 3 days at home with the family. But yeah, it is a lot to balance, and I always hesitate using the word balance, because to me that assumes that there is a balance to achieve. And I think I have a different definition of balance these days, and that is, like we talked about earlier, with the different seasons of life and just kind of going with the flow. And that might even change week to week of, where you need to put more focus in one area. But truly, the biggest thing that's helped me is just trying to, each day actually, to take time to step back and look at what's going on at home, look at what's going on at work, and kind of assess, so where do I need to be putting possibly more time or more energy, or just shifting, not necessarily even more, but just where does God want me to direct my focus this week?
Yeah.
I love that. I think oftentimes we think that balance is some magic formula. And as you said, it so depends on the season of your life. And sometimes, like you said, it depends on the week.
Yeah.
So
True.
What are some of your habits or routines that help you be an effective leader in all those different areas?
Sure. I'd say a big part of it that's a newer side to me is taking the time to feel my feelings. As an Enneagram 3, I guess what I've been reading is that you're typically the most disconnected of the numbers. You're the most disconnected from your feelings. And that's because you just get so focused on the work and getting the work done, and you just stay in that mode. So it's hard, but taking the time to stop and say, how am I feeling? And internally kind of checking in and seeing what I need. Do I need kind of some time with friends to just like get out of that zone that I've been in mentally? Or do I need to step away and be by myself for a while? I'm definitely an introvert. So regular alone time is super, super important for me as well. And one of those things too, that's a challenge in this stage of life with little ones and with work. But I'd say that's the biggest thing, is learning how to check in internally with what I'm feeling and figure out from there kind of what I need to do to keep taking care of myself so that I can be the best mom and wife and leader, and friend.
Yeah, what are some of the ways that you do that? How do you take care of yourself on a regular basis?
Mm-hmm. Part of it for me has been doing things that I enjoy, figuring out what I enjoy. As crazy as that sounds, I don't know if any other Enneagram 3s might relate, that can even be a challenge to figure out what it is that you enjoy outside of your work, because you get so just achievement focused. But reading, being outside, going hiking, truly the things that like disconnect my mind and use my brain in a different way, are some of the things that I feel like give me the most peace and decompression. Yeah, so I'd say that that's a big piece.
Okay, thanks. Love that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Abby, if you could share some advice with any younger leaders who are just starting out in ministry or in career, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I would tell them, surround yourself with good people, people that you can trust, people that you can be yourself. You can be truly your raw self, and people who you look up to or who you've seen lead in ways that you admire and aspire to. And then, of course, the other part that I've said a few times is get to know your voice, get to know what matters to you, and take risks in using that voice and sharing how God made you and what God made you to care about.
That's so good.
Love it. Abby, have you had any particular mentors? You mentioned, finding people that you can look up to and kind of emulate your life after. So have there been any particular mentors that have impacted your life and your leadership?
I would say I've had a lot of informal mentors, people who I've learned from, different bosses that I've had through the years. And then I would actually say that a lot of the people that I listen to on podcasts, I consider my mentors. They just don't know it.
Yes.
It's a one-way relationship, but that's okay. Currently, I do feel like one of the pastors that I work with is definitely a mentor to me in my leadership in a way that I've never experienced before. He's got an awareness, and he really gets to know you personally. He listens, he asks questions, and it's making a huge difference in my leadership. I really, really feel that I'm just blessed to be able to work with him right now. So, yeah.
That's awesome. It's always encouraging when you have somebody that you get to work with directly who is,
really is
a mentor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right, Abby. So we believe that leaders are learners and that we can always be learning new things, that we never get to the point where we do know everything.
That's right.
So what is your favorite method of learning new things?
Yeah, in this stage of life, it would definitely be podcasts, with the little ones around, being in the car and listening to podcasts, or getting ready in the morning, listening to podcasts. That's definitely the main way. Of course, I love books too. It's just hard with the little one that you're making sure that they don't pull something down on top of them or whatever. It's hard to do that these days, but
yeah.
And then conferences, gosh, I don't know, I'm a lover of conferences. I know there's some people who don't feel the same way, but if you can find a conference that is hitting on some of the things that you're passionate about, being able to go, be encouraged, be inspired, and talk to people who are into those same things, man, oh man, I love those experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, they can make just such a huge difference. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So do you have a favorite podcast or book that you've read recently that you would want to share?
It's hard to pick a favorite. There's like a handful of podcasts.
Okay, you can say more than one.
I can. So Andy Stanley, of course, leadership podcast. Craig Rochelle's podcast, Story Brand. There's a Story Brand podcast that's awesome as well. And then just, I would say on more of the personal or family side, it's not necessarily leadership, but some of it is The Lazy Genius. Love that podcast. It's really fun.
Awesome. We love giving our listeners other podcasts to check out. And I'm kind of a podcast addict, so I'm going to have to check out. I've listened to most of those, but I will have to check out the last one you mentioned. So
yes, it's really fun.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would want to share, Abby? Anything that we didn't ask you about that you feel that you would like to share with our listeners?
Just trust God in your journey, and that God has you where you are today for a reason, and for a good reason. So trust where you are today and just show up, be yourself, and, just be confident in that.
Yeah. It's like such a simple concept, but yet it's so hard to do, right?
That's right.
I need to put
but it's worth it
on like a 10-second loop or something and just play that every morning.
I could just make this like an audio file, that little clip just as a downloadable
little thing. That every morning.
I think that's how I survive, the stage of life when it's just like you're so busy and there's so many things going on. I just have to remind myself, like, this is a season and God put me here for a reason, and I'm experiencing this day and the way this day is going for a reason. And I may not know now, but it's all contributing to something, and it's all for good. So yeah.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Abby, for joining us on the podcast. This has just been such a blessing to me, and I know it will be to everyone who listens. So is there any particular way that people could connect with you? I know that you're part of our Purposeful Leadership Facebook group.
Yes.
I don't think you have a website, but tell me if there's any other ways that people should, find you and follow you.
Sure. Yeah. The main way I would say is Instagram. I love posting on there and just talking about life and talking about leadership and all kinds of things, and connecting with people on there. So feel free to follow me or send me a message. Name is really easy. It's just Abbey Jo, ABBEYJO.
Okay, great. And again, we'll link up to that in the show notes. So
awesome.
Thanks again, Abby. And we appreciate your time joining us and being part of our Christian Woman Leadership Podcast community.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed just getting to have this conversation and talk about leadership and just awesome, fun things together.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving us a rating and review in your podcast app? This helps more women just like you find the podcast, and it also helps them to know whether the podcast would be a good fit for them. Just go to the show in your podcast app, then scroll down until you see the option for ratings and reviews. From there, you can tap to rate and write a review. It means the world to us when you take a couple minutes to do this, and thank you so much to everyone who has left a review. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.